Not very frequently I get to say that I've got the world's best as a guest here on Jay's Corner, but today, that is that day. We've got Kevin Cole. He's returning here. He is the world's best Gershwin pianist. Kevin, thank you for
Hey,
rejoining me here.
well, thank you, Jay. You make me sound like I should go in the oven like a turkey. I'm the best, you know. So,
These are not my words. These
oh,
are in print. These are in print by the highly acclaimed reviews that I've seen. And we've known each other a long time, grew up in the same small little town, and you're returning home for a holiday season concert. Why don't you tell us about it first?
well, I've been doing this coal in your stocking, spelled Cole. So people know that having coal in your stocking is a good thing, as I always say. At the State Theater in Bay City, Michigan. I want to say this is either my 13th or 14th year of doing it. It may even be longer because it started out under another name called A Coal Christmas to coincide with the Christmas CD that I made, oh Lord, back in the early 2000s. So somebody, though, after a few years of that, said to me, I got a better title for you. And when they said coal in your stocking, I said, I can't beat that. So this year, I'm performing at the State Theater on Saturday, December 6th at 7 p.m. and on Sunday, December 7th at 3 p.m. And for those of you who are familiar with Bay City, the State Theater is on Washington Street,
Right.
and it's really a terrific venue for a solo piano. I bring in a Steinway Model D, which is a 9-foot concert grand, and it's the only time in this town, once a year, you get to hear me on a 9-foot concert grand because there are no 9-foot Steinways in Bay City, to my knowledge, unless somebody's got one in their bedroom. But
Hiding it.
yeah,
So it's
could
hiding
be.
it.
But at any rate, it's a great evening of both popular Christmas things, secular, religious. It's got everything. Piano solos. I do a few vocals. But in addition, in the last few years, I've added a trio of women that I call my Angel Trio. And you'll know a couple of them because of the three, we have Tesra Moore, Susan Fisher, used to be Susan Jacobs, and Rebecca Smith, who's actually a cousin of mine down the line. And the three of them, when they sing, the blend of voices is just absolutely out of this world. So that's why I call them the Angel Trio, and they've become very popular as part of my Christmas show. Now, this year, what's different is that I'm doing an additional performance on December 5th, which is the Friday, the night before I do the two at the State, in Chicago for the first time as part of the Ravinia Festival.
Oh, there you go.
And yeah, that's a big deal because
Yeah, that
I've
is.
been performing with Ravinia since 1999 and
Right.
with the Chicago Symphony for multiple summers there. And so they're having me for my Christmas show on Friday, December 5th. And I'd love to tell people to go and get tickets, but it's been sold out for over a month.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
so people haven't forgotten me, even though I've moved back to Bay City in
Right.
recent
You've not been
years.
in Chicago.
Yeah, so that's encouraging, but it'll be fun to do it in front of a different audience. I did it once in Maryland. I think that was last year in Annapolis in a small venue, and it plays well. You don't have to be the hometown boy because everyone can relate to the music and also the stories I tell in between.
Did you create the music as arrangements for yourself, or is it you're always have been an arranger, right? We're called
Yeah.
creator, on top. So what's your blend as far as you're playing straight from the music and your memory
Well,
versus
I play
you're,
from the music for each of the three women sing solo, as well as two trio arrangements. One of the trio arrangements this year, Away in a Manger, I did fully myself. The other one they sing as a trio is Mary Did You Know? And I just tweaked a already written 3-part women's arrangement and to just give it a little extra, well, as some people would call it, zhuzh. And so I give
right?
it a little extra zhuzh. But yes, you're right. All these arrangements I do on the piano start out as improvisations. And then in my brain, since I never write these things down, I've never done it really. I just remember what I like. And if in the middle of an arrangement, I say, oh, I want to shift keys, then I just lock it into a part of my brain so it stays there. Now, hopefully it'll always be that way, because people ask me all the time, why don't you write these down for other pianists to
Yeah.
play? And I always say, now look, they have computer programs now that you can play a recording. Yeah, and it'll print out the music. So I said, that's for somebody to do when I'm, playing on a cloud, so. But yeah, and it's fun because it gives me a little leeway. And sometimes I do change it in the course of the live performance, depending on how I feel. But for the most part, once I like something, and especially the transition, that's what I'm known for. I have other fellow pianists that say, I don't know how you get from that key to that key. And what you do shouldn't work, but it kind of does. So yeah, but again, as you know, there's a finite number of known Christmas songs, be they sacred or secular. So every year it's like reinventing the wheel. Now I do play some just about every year because people want to hear them. Sure. But then I want to change it up for the audience and also for me. And there's a sing-along as part of my concerts. And I think that's also what makes it unique for the audience. Because by the time we get to the end of the program, I can just feel, it's almost palatable that people they want to sing, they want to do something because it's Christmas songs. That's so we do that. We do about 7 sing-along songs, and it's really a fun evening for the whole family.
How in the world did you come up with the transitions for yourself? Like, mere mortals, we can barely read the music and, repeat. It's pretty funny because, when professionals are playing, it's like, oh, that's the way it's supposed to sound. And, as opposed to, things that we're like struggling for the 5th time or not practicing and things like that. Is it just innate? In other words, you sat down one day and you are able to do this? Or
yeah,
I'm looking for what balance between very well practiced and studied to what you're doing. Give the people just some feel for what that looks like.
Well, I have my mother to blame because I started piano lessons when I was 4.5, and by the first 2-3 years of being in lessons, I was devouring music so fast that my piano teacher at the time, who was just a local teacher, nothing extra, but she'd come for the lesson the following week, and she'd turn the page, and well, let's learn this for next week. And I'd say, I already learned it. And then I played for her. Then she'd turn another page. And this one, I was like going through, because, back in those days, and I'm sure they still have them, they had these books that go like A to H or 1 to 20, or like the John Thompson books, they had their series too. And so I was just plowing through these series, and instead of moving me into real classical music, because sometimes in these series of books, when you teach them, when they water them down a bit, okay, well, we get done with a whole series, and then she'd start a whole nother series. So I'd be starting at the beginning. I'm sure I went through about 5 different series in the course of about, I don't know, maybe less than 2 years. But when I'd be practicing, my mom had an innate sense. She'd be in the kitchen, probably making supper or something, and she'd call out after she'd hear me play through the piece that I was supposed to play for the following week. And she'd say, well, now, and she'd just yell out, do your own thing. Give it your own razzmatazz, or whatever word she'd use. And so that triggered something in me. She wanted me to improvise. So I'd go back, play over it, and then start to elaborate on it from, like I said, from the time I was 6, 7 years old. And the other thing she did that helped my technique without her knowing it is that she had a sense that I wasn't getting enough from the teacher at the time. So she would go to our music store and buy like 500 of the world's greatest waltzes, 100 of the world's greatest ragtime, 50 great polkas we all know and love. And these things would magically appear on the music rack on the piano. So when I'd get done practicing for my lesson, I was going through those. And all of those forms I just mentioned, waltzes, ragtimes, and polkas, your left hand has to really move because you're doing what they call stride piano playing, which is where you kind of hit a note and then you go and play a chord, and then you hit a note, you play a chord. And by her putting those books up there and me rifling through them, it was developing my left hand technique that I have to this day. Because people always say, how can you be so accurate with that? I said, well, mother knows best.
So, from everything you've described, like what you've just described is like unimaginable to most people. I mean, so I've read somewhere, what was it, Horowitz or Rachmaninoff said, how soon do you know that the person is going to be able to be a professional pianist? And someone has stated, moment 1A, like the moment they set their hands there. Would you? So it sounds like you're agreeing with that, because you're not.
Yeah.
Everything you've described, someone like me who has read music, that is like completely foreign.
Yeah, it's funny. The few times I get asked once in a while when I'm in town to play with an orchestra, if I would do a master class or a talk to either, grade school students or college students. And it's kind of funny. So, and if they have students that want to play for me, I say, great. I have to also be very cautious that I leave town and whatever I say to them goes back to their teacher. And hopefully the teacher agrees with it. Because, you don't want to put a student, well, Kevin said this, you say that, that sort of thing. But I will say a big part of my knowing before they play a note is how they approach the piano when they walk up to it and sit down.
It sounds a lot like what I've just stated about what I've read.
Well, it's really not different from acting auditions, because I've been involved with some professional musicals and as music director, and you're sitting at a table, or in my case, I like to play for the auditioner. But the minute they walk in the room, you get a sense of their presence, how they use their body, because it's strange. There are a few people that are deceiving, that they come in and they're kind of schlumpy and then they sit down and they play like they're on fire. But at the same time, that personality that comes through, you see physically and with your vision. That's number one. But Horowitz, Rachmaninoff, these people, they're absolutely right. The minute you hear them play the first few bars of their piece, you can kind of get a sense of it. It's not only the command of the technique, but there has to be an emotional connection, because Jay, I'm sure you see on YouTube, there are pianists playing faster than you can. That's humanly possible. Yeah,
unbelievable.
I mean, I don't even have to name names. You just go on, and in fact, there are a lot of YouTube videos where they just line them all up. Who's playing faster, 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 and that's fantastic. I you cannot deny the gifts that these modern day pianists have. But on the other hand, I liken it to going to the zoo. When you go to the zoo, some of the most impressive animals are in the cat family. Like, let's say a tiger, all right? Tigers are really impressive. First of all, the way they look, the colors, the way they walk, their presence, okay? But you and I both know that you can't touch the tiger. There's the moat. They're far away. You can admire them. You can go, oh my God, that's fantastic. Oh, look at that tiger. But there's a connection missing, because you're dazzled by the tiger's presence and their reputation. But you can't really connect emotionally to a tiger.
Do you think that that's happening now? Which is that, like you stated, like YouTube, if you see like a Rachmaninoff prelude, they are playing the fast ones. They're these kids, and kids, I'm saying, performers today are playing at such, it's almost, it feels going off their technique.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's pure technique. And like I said, I do not judge that at all as being a bad thing. No, it's fantastic. I mean, you could say Horowitz especially was, his technique was flawless. But you listen to the tone of a Horowitz, you listen to his connection emotionally to what he's doing, and his well is just deeper. And that's not just because of his age when we see these video performances or listen to recordings. It's just because he breathes. And I have a feeling that a lot of modern day pianists only breathe so they don't expire. I don't really feel them breathing with the music because you hate. Okay, it's like they're waiting for the next dazzling passage to happen,
Right.
and it is dazzling. I'm dazzled. I can't. Like I said, I've seen a lot of pianists in my short lifetime, but some of them today are. You just say, where does this come from? But at the same time, I just want to say, where are you rushing to? A lot of
Interesting.
people can play fast. A lot of people can play
Yeah.
fast and
No, that's the
accurate.
thing. Right.
But how about the balance of that? But on the other hand, as Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof would say, everyone's got to pay bills, mortgages, rents, and whatnot. And if they find a way to do it through what their act or whatever, more power to them. It's not my journey. I can play as fast as anyone. Set the clock. Let's go. But that's not been my thing. It's not a competition, but in many ways, when people put up videos like that, and I
Right.
know it's not the performers putting up the videos, but they make it look like she's competing with him, he's competing with her, and they're not. Everyone's making music to the best of their abilities. And the other thing too is the real judge is go and hear this person in person and see
That's
if
so
you,
interesting.
yeah, if you feel a connection to them. It's no different than some people like Frank Sinatra, some like Nat King Cole, some like Tony Bennett. I like them all, and I can't choose one over the other because for certain songs, that person connects with me more. Whereas another friend would say to me, "Oh no, I connect with so and so's version more." But the beauty is, you can like them all. It's like a meal. I don't want just steak all the time. You know.
So talking about versions, Kevin, you're famous. You're very well, reviewed, and lots of people have congregated to watch you play a lot of Gershwin's works
Yeah.
throughout the days, throughout the years, etc. Tell me about the most recent one, which is now a couple of years old, right? You dug up the original score for Rhapsody in Blue.
Yeah, that
Tell
was all through the University of Michigan Gershwin Initiative. And
Okay.
during the centennial year of the premiere of the Rhapsody in Blue, which premiered in 1924. So in 2024, I approached Mark Clegg, who was really the guy who started the whole project of the initiative. And the initiative basically is they're restoring all of the Gershwin works, starting with the concert works. They did Porgy and Bess a few years ago. This has been going on for almost 10 years now, and they figure it's about a 30-year project. So they'll start with the concert works, move on to the musicals and film scores, and then the minor works and just singular pop songs will be last. But they're not trying, they are getting these things back to what he wrote and without the editing, okay,
Mm,
unless they were his edited, what he wanted edited, and requested or whatnot. And it's very complicated because so much of what he did in the early years wasn't written down. We do have
mm,
some recordings to reference, but they're not complete. And then you have the acolytes, as I call them, of Gershwin, who like Oscar Levant and others, Roy Bargee, and that were there when he played them. And in fact, I think in Oscar Levant's case, he learned the Rhapsody in Blue by watching Gershwin play because there was no printed music, and it didn't get printed until like 2 years after the premiere. And even with that, the editors at the time were old school European musicians, and they didn't understand this form, this kind of jazz, as they were calling it, the umbrella word. And so they go, "Oh, he's repeating himself here. We'll cut that out." Oh, because they didn't want to publish, all those measures of music. That's too much. So what they did, though, in making those decisions without Gershwin's approval at the time,
mm,
was
mm.
a lot of the beautiful transitions that get you from one motif to another, one theme to another. were gone. And so things seemed very piecemeal and abrupt. And I'm speaking of the Rhapsody in particular. George
Right.
even wrote a letter to a friend in the early 30s saying, you know, I really should go back and put the piano part was mainly where they were editing and put back how I played it back then. Because a lot of it was improvised at the original, as you may know, at the original performance, February 12th, 1924, there were blank pages in the conductor's score where the piano part should have been because it was written in like less than 4 weeks. And Paul Whiteman, the conductor, was really sweating bullets. But Gershwin wrote at the bottom of the first page that was blank, "Wait for nod." So can you imagine the conductor's just waiting? And did he not? Did he not to bring the orchestra back in? So anyway, knowing that as just one of the stories of how this music was treated in those days, 'cause even though things were popular, it wasn't necessarily so, to quote Ira, that they would save them and preserve them because it was a disposable medium. They were already on writing, you know, he was on to writing Concerto and F or a musical or all these things at once. And
Right.
what happened to the scores afterwards? They didn't think about preservation.
Of course not.
So now we have these wonderful music archaeologists that are digging deeper than ever before and treating Gershwin like they've always treated Beethoven and Mozart and whatnot when they create these texts or as close as possible to the composer's editions.
So you've
So
got these
wait,
editions of which there are tons, right?
oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
how many?
So
How many different editions?
oh my
Of,
goodness, who knows? But I will tell you how my involvement with the performing of these and recording of these
yeah.
through Mark Clegg and the U of M, the Gershwin Initiative, was because I had the opportunity to record Rhapsody
Right.
in Blue, Second Rhapsody, and Concerto in F with the uh, National Orchestra Institute out in Baltimore, Maryland, with
Nice.
David Allen Miller, who conducts the Albany Symphony. So the opportunity came up to do a recording on the Naxos label, two recordings. I think they were 2 years apart. And to try to create the definitive recordings using what we feel is the closest score additions to what Gershwin did himself. So I have one more piece to record yet, and they're finishing
All
up.
right.
Yeah, the I Got Rhythm Variations, which was the last concert piece he wrote for piano and orchestra. It's about 8.5 minutes. Charming piece, really fun, tricky, but it's a delight for the audience and for the orchestra because it doesn't get played a lot like the Second Rhapsody either. So we did a big concert though, and your viewers and your friends and everybody who follows Jo can go to YouTube and just type in Kevin U of M Kevin Cole,
Sure.
and you'll get. I do the first version of the Rhapsody, which is the original jazz band version, and then I do a lot of solo work. I do the three preludes. I do my own the Gershwin medley that I'm known for. I do Fascinating Rhythm, and then I talk a little bit because what made that concert unique in February of 2024 was I was actually playing on a Steinway that belonged to George Gershwin.
Interesting.
So yeah, well, to be able to do that, you know, it's just a dream. And this was the piano he had. They figured like around 1933, 1934. So he would have written the I Get Rhythm Variations on it, a lot of Porgy and Bess, and other things he was working on at the time. And it was given as a gift by a nephew of George and Ira Gershwin, Mark Gershwin, to U of M. And so I
Nice.
asked, I was very cheeky because the concert was being held at the state, I think it's called the State Theater in downtown Ann Arbor. And they had never moved that piano out of U of M. Of course, it's very precious. They had it totally restored, all that good stuff. So I said to Mark, I said, what would be the chances that they would bring that piano to the theater downtown Ann Arbor? He goes, let me check. And about 2 weeks later, he said, we're going to move it, which was quite an honor. I mean, I was hoping they would, and they did it. So for what would we have, about 1,200 people there that day, it was a real treat. But I'm so glad the videos exist because that piano has a very unique sound. It's very bright, clean. It was a Model A piano, but it was an A with an extender. So it was a little bit longer. I'm trying to think, what was it? It was, I think they're normally like 6 foot or a little over. And this had a little longer left side, basically, so that the bass strings could be a little longer, which made it fuller than it should have been for the size. I think they called it a long A Steinway. But what a beautiful thing to be able to do after all these years of being accused of being the reincarnation of George Gershwin as a pianist. So yeah, it was a full circle moment for me. And this year, 2025, is the centennial for the Concerto in F, because he started writing that just months after um, the premiere of the Rhapsody, because of Walter Damrosch conducting the New York, I think it was called the New York Symphony Society. I don't think it was called New York Phil yet. Thought, oh, Gershwin's good box office. I can tell today, this Rhapsody blue thing. So we better get him. So they commissioned him to do a concerto for $500, which was an okay sum.
That sounds like a lot at that time.
Yeah, in 1925, and then just last summer to celebrate it, because he wrote about, I want to say almost all of the first movement at Chautauqua, which is in on the western side of New York State, about an
Oh, I
hour from
see.
Buffalo. And because one of his teachers at the time said, you're never going to get this done in New York. People are always bugging you. You're always going to parties, blah, blah, blah. You should come out for a few weeks to Chautauqua because they had music, art, all that stuff. It was kind of like an interlock in its way. And it really happened around the same time. So Gershwin they had these shacks, these practice shacks, and they'd have a piano in there and probably a fan, maybe. Maybe they didn't even have electricity.
Probably
But
not a
Gershwin,
fan.
for a few weeks, wrote. And then, of course, around 4 o'clock was the time that the students there in the different disciplines would have their, I don't know if they were done for the day or the break. So, of course, when they knew Gershwin was on campus, they all ran to his hut. And, of course, George, being so amiable, would launch into playing all sorts of his tunes, and the students were just dazzled. And so but anyway, so I was at Chautauqua to do some lecture talks with one of the Gershwin cousins, and we went over to the shack. It has a plaque on it, and I did some playing of the Concerto in F and a tune or two. So it was really to be in the footsteps during these commemorations and milestones. Really, 100 years for something is quite remarkable. And I will say, and I'm sure I would be backed up by conductors and pianists, that the Rhapsody in Blue and the Concerto in F really are two of the top concertos that are played in any given year since they've been written. And then I would say coming close, coming close would be Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, Tchaikovsky First, Grieg Piano Concerto. Those would be up there. But really, and to think the most popular American piano concerto was written 100 years ago. There's nothing that has topped it. Because, Barber, all these other composers have written, Copland, Howard Hanson, they all wrote piano concertos, and they're good, but they never caught on in
They're
popularity.
not. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think it's because the people I mentioned, Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, Grieg, Gershwin, they just had these fantastic melody lines that almost didn't need chords underneath them. You just can hum the melodies and they just stay with you. And I also believe that the way they're orchestrated, because Gershwin was the Concerto was the first piece he orchestrated, half-hour concerto. That's pretty daunting. He could have done the Rhapsody in Blue, but because of the time constraints, they let the arranger for the Paul Whiteman Band do it. But at any rate, I think the emotional connection that we all feel is because the pianist that created these, and I don't know, Grieg was an okay pianist, but he wasn't really a concert pianist, but certainly Rachmaninoff and Gershwin were, that when you orchestrate something, and you're going to be the one sitting down playing, I think you
That's a different thing.
invest. Yeah, you invest
That's
more.
a
Yeah,
different
yeah, you invest more, and you also uh, the emotional context is the content of that. You get more inside the composer when it is, and as a pianist, you can tell the difference immediately when they're a pianist composer or just a composer. Uh,
So the audience certainly knows by now, Kevin, that especially after listening to your explanations of the history, that it's much more than just a simple set of notes Gershwin has been, but your life has been very connected with family. And I was wondering, you played with this his piano that was historical, has a history behind it.
yeah.
Were you able to play it at his house or with his members? And tell the audience about your connection with
Well, this all happened. My Gershwin connection, and
Mhm.
then subsequently at what I call the Gershwin effect. Oh, my whole life, well, how his music affects people, and it literally changed my life because of one man, Edward Jablonski, who was a writer born in Bay City, Michigan, of all things. I mean, talk about
That's
coincidence,
incredible. Right.
serendipity. So when I was 15 and making my first trip to New York, I looked him up. I played for him. He pointed out, because I'd never heard Gershwin play or speak or anything. I just,
Hmm.
heard other pianist recordings of him. But I did see that movie Rhapsody in Blue that Warner Brothers did in 1945, and it had Oscar Levant doing all the playing, so you knew it was authentic Gershwin style. You had the cast of Porgy and Bess, they had Al Jolson, they had all these people who knew Gershwin and premiered his works. So the music in that movie really hit me strong. And then when I found out that this book was co-authored by a guy from Bay City, went to New York, I was 15,
Sure.
played for him, and he literally said the sentence that changed my life. He said, "Do you know when you play Gershwin, you sound like Gershwin?" And I'm only 15 years old. And
Right.
so then he put on some recordings on reel to reel of a radio broadcast of Gershwin playing and speaking. And I had to admit, even at my tender age, there were a lot of similarities. And now, where that comes from, when people would ask Ed in interviews, they'd call him or, whatever, to speak about me and meeting me. They say, well, how does Kevin, when he's in Bay City, Michigan, how can he play like Gershwin? I mean, he never
Right.
heard him or whatnot. And Ed said, I can't explain it. He just does. And I think in Ed's case too, how he became the world's really foremost scholar on Gershwin and all American composers, because he knew so many of them, Irving Berlin and Bert Lane and Harold Arlen, and the list goes on and on and on, and wrote biographies on them, is because the music. He heard the music of Gershwin when he was in high school, Central High School in Bay City, and wrote a fan letter basically to George, even though George had died in 1937, to his brother Ira, saying how much he loved his, George's music and whatnot. And Ira wrote him back, and they became pen pals, if you can imagine. So his started with a letter to George's brother. Mine started with picking up the phone in Manhattan and looking up Jablonski E and just picking one. And the first one I picked was him, which was really, really bizarre. So,
That's
again,
meant to be.
it was the power of the music. I'm involved right now and have been for a number of years with a group called Classical Kids Live. And about a dozen years ago, maybe, yeah, about a dozen years ago, I said to my friend Paul Piment, who was one of my former plaids in Chicago, who was executive director for North America of Classical Kids Live, because they do these programs with orchestra. They're about 50 to 60 minutes long on all these composers. And I was just talking to him on the phone. I was in Pasadena to do a concert. And I said, Paul, riddle me this. How come you have all these programs about these dead European composers and no American composer? He goes, well, that would be great. I said, well, you should be doing one on Gershwin. Yeah, but how would I get permission to use the music? I said, you're speaking to the right person.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
said, I can't grant that, but I certainly can. You can plead your case to one of the relatives who does have power. And so he did, and the result was this program that I am the onstage pianist for with orchestra, because we use a lot of excerpts. Two actors, one plays Gershwin, one plays a kid from Harlem who doesn't think he has any talent, but he hasn't been able to unlock whatever music is inside him. And this Gershwin manages to help him. So the program is called Gershwin's Magic Key. And you can use key to relate to music, but you can also relate it to the music unlocking something in you. And it relates Gershwin's story when he was a kid. He hated music. He thought any of his classmates that listened to music were sissies, until he heard a classmate when he was 10 play humoresque, Dvorak humoresque on the violin as part of a school program. He was listening outside the window because he loved to play hooky. He didn't go to school much. But that piece of music, because at the end of it, it has this little blue note, which means like it's a flatted fifth, but that doesn't matter. It was just something, when he heard it, all of a sudden, it created this storm with him that he wanted to know more about music. And the same for me when I saw that movie. And then when I met Jablonski, the power of Gershwin's music, I had to do something about it. So I made American music my platform, even though I studied classical, at Interlochen, both at the camp and at the academy. Um, and I love classical music. And I try to play chamber music with people all the time because I'm a really good accompanist, and not all solo artists are. But I love to accompany. And all the years I've played for Sylvia McNair, one of the great sopranos of the 20th century. And she's had the best accompanist in the world. So for us to have been working since 2003 together, and we are still working together, even though she's in retirement, we're doing some more recording. Because we did a recording that came out, I guess it's over a year ago, of kind of obscure Harold Arlen, who wrote the music to Wizard of Oz, for a reference point. He wrote a musical and individual songs with Martin Charnin, who your listeners will know from, he wrote the lyrics to the musical Annie, is his big thing. So they got together, a 30-year-old Martin Charnin and a 65-year-old, I believe, or 60-year-old Harold Arlen, wrote a musical and some songs. And they had kind of fallen into obscurity, but they're very interesting. They weren't mainstream. A lot of them feel like art songs almost. But Sylvia and I went into a recording studio with Bill Rudman. And your listeners might know Bill Rudman because he heads up the musical theater project and has a very popular NPR show called Footlight Parade. And so he produced it. And, it's one of those things, it's a special album. It's not going to be mainstream. But we did it for historical purposes, and it was hard. So now, as a follow-up, because Sylvia and I both said, if we record again with you, Bill, can we do something that's a little more melodic and a little easier? Because the intervals she had to sing, what I had to do, because the arrangements were more like in block chords. I mean, they were his, but they weren't elaborated on. And since I knew Harold Arlen personally, I could kind of say where I could expand it, where I could give it as one friend calls it, you take a piece and you colorize it. And I said, oh, thank you. I think that's a good thing. But anyway, this coming year, we're going to go into the studio and record songs by Hugh Martin, which are another composer, songwriter I knew. Hugh Martin and Ralph Blaine wrote the score for Meet Me in St. Louis for Judy Garland. So people know the trolley song, The Boy Next Door, and Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. They only wrote 3 songs. Well, they did an arrangement of Skip Jumalu, but they only wrote 3 songs for that movie. But what 3 songs, of course, became classic. So anyway, we're going to go to the studio, and I'm looking forward to that because Sylvia still sings like a dream, and we know each other, so it's really really a fun thing to do. So, so anyway, to get back to the whole Gershwin connection, it boils down to, Jay, the power of music, because that's what drew me to all this was Gershwin's music. I was listening to other music, of course, in musicals and film musicals and blah, blah. But I think because once I got to learn about his backstory, George Gershwin was not a snob when it came to music. I mean, in his collection, he had
Mm.
Debussy, Bach, Chopin, so he could play these things, and he knew the forms. But he liked pop music. He liked Broadway, and then eventually got into film in the 30s. But he also liked the concert hall, and he thought, why do I have to choose? But back then, the critics in the 20s and 30s, you had some that said, "Oh, stick to writing for the concert world, and you'll be great." And the other ones would say, "Oh, no, 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 give up that highbrow stuff and keep writing for the stage and pop songs because that's your thing." And he said, "Do I have to choose?" And
Don't you
so
think we still have that now?
oh, sure we do. I mean, it's
I mean,
gotten
we definitely, right? The people who go to the lyric opera, they don't want to be going to the blues bar. It's
yeah. Well, I think as the audience, well, again, we've lost a lot of audience, and we continue
right,
to. So we have to get the youth involved.
right.
I was just talking to someone the other day about this, who's a conductor, composer, orchestrator, and he just got done doing some big premiere in LA with a big orchestra for a video game concert. Because, these are very popular,
Oh,
Zelda, Warcraft,
right,
whatever
right,
it
right,
is.
right.
And they get a huge orchestra.
I know nothing about that stuff, right?
Yeah, the huge orchestra records the
Mm.
soundtrack, and audiences come because they know all this, and it sounds like movie music, classical music.
Yeah,
So I
right.
said to him, I said, wouldn't it be something if some video game company, excuse me, decided like they did, well, like Warner Brothers did with Bugs Bunny, to use
Yeah,
classical music as
right.
some of the music in these video games so that they'd be humming those tunes.
Those,
Yeah, and then not knowing that it's Beethoven or Mozart or Rossini or whatever, and then that might pique your curiosity. Well, what does the whole piece sound like? I again, that's just me, wishful
that's a great
thinking.
idea. I mean, you would know. I would never have known William Tell Overture or Barbara
Yeah,
Ripsonville if
yeah,
Bugs Bunny. It wasn't in Bugs Bunny or Elmer Fudd. In the back in
yeah.
the day. It's a
Well,
good
I
point.
just think, well, and so much of this music, it's in public domain. You can do what you want with it. But I think there's something there that could connect to getting the younger audience in. They're doing stuff. I mean, the three most popular concerts in the symphonic world right now, I would say number one is playing live to a movie, okay, where the orchestra does the whole score, all
Hmm.
right, live. The second one are the video, and they may be one and one. They may be playing, a whole evening of from Zelda and having like the creator there or one of the characters there, and the audience knows all this music and they go berserk. And then the third one are these Cirque du Soleil type evenings, and they have several of them now where they perform in front of the orchestra. All these amazing acrobatics and whatnot. So those are the three most popular concerts. Now, how do I compete with that? Well, Gershwin still sells tickets. People know
Sure.
it's a good time. And then back in the day when I was working with Marvin Hamlisch, the composer for Chorus Line and The Way We Were movie and all that stuff, they came because it was Marvin Hamlisch and he was entertaining, and they knew they would have a good time. So I have a Hamlisch evening that I thought was going to really take off in his 75th year because he died. He was only 68 when he died in 2012. And I wrote and put together this symphonic evening. It also could be done with a little trio and a couple of singers. I recorded it with the Kalamazoo Symphony. Get that recording, and it really is the only, which is hard to believe. Marvin Hamlisch, who wrote for over 40 films and did all this stuff, he had ever had a recording that really showed the breadth and width
Breath
of
of what he
what he
did.
could do. So when I put this evening together called "Play It Again," Marvin, I have multimedia, I have pictures, I had permission for all this stuff through his widow, Terry Hamlisch, who's a dear friend of mine. She said, "Do it," and so we did it several places. And then when we did it with Kalamazoo, we did an archival recording, but it turned out so well with just a few tweaks. We released it commercially so people can get it. But what I love about that evening is you really learn not only his backstory through the my chat and the pictures. But you get to hear through the piano, which was his big medium, because that was what everyone looked forward to in a Hamlisch evening, whether you, yeah, tribute to Gershwin, which is what we did for 8 years all over the country. They waited for that moment in the second half where it was just him and the piano improvising on whatever songwriter the evening was about. And so what I try to do is not recreate, but give people a chance to know him and how he really came from very little and created Marvin Hamlisch, but also to reconnect with his music and those moments that made Marvin Marvin, because his humor was impeccable. It was wonderful. So to that end, I'm trying to promote that. And it was interesting, Jay, how the transition to add Hamlisch to all my Gershwin notoriety. I'm so glad he became a mentor, a friend. I remember the first time we were put together in Saratoga for the summer programs at the Saratoga Performing Arts Center. I think that was back in, I want to say 2000, what was that, 4 maybe? I think it was. And we didn't know who put us together. My job was just to play the Rhapsody in Blue. We did 2 nights of Gershwin, and they brought in a couple singer dancers, whatnot. Yeah. So we're at the rehearsal for Rhapsody in Blue because this is an all Gershwin concert. And after we went through it, we had a break, and I said to Marvin, I said, listen, you're a fantastic pianist. You know that. You can play the Rhapsody in Blue, and you could even conduct it from the piano like Leonard Bernstein did. And he looked at me and he goes, I don't want to work that hard. So we laughed. And 8 years of doing Gershwin concerts until his untimely death in August of 2012 at the age of 68. But what a great guy, mentor, friend, just a fantastic human being. And the one thing he said, I'll never forget, of all the things he said, we were in a rehearsal with the San Diego Symphony, and we were about to run the Rhapsody in Blue. And just before we started, he looked at the orchestra and he said, I know what I'm doing. And he pointed to the orchestra. You know what you're doing. And then he pointed to me at the piano. And he certainly knows what he's doing. So let's just make music. And he started conducting. And Jay, I'm going to tell you, in those 3 sentences, he showed, first of all, utter respect for all the musicians on stage, but also he connected all of us in such a way that we wanted to give our best to him. It's just, that's what it's all about. When you have the right combination of people, and Marvin had that knack of bringing the right people together, whether they were well known, not so well known, we were all there for Marvin.
Well, you've got such a long list of, connection points. And so I think you wanted to say that you're working on a new book or something like that, where you're tying together all these. A great way to wrap up.
Everyone's always saying, when are you going to write your book? Because something will come up, like recently in the news that actress Diane Ladd had passed away. So that triggered a memory of when I lived in Beverly Hills and in an apartment, and her mother lived next door to me, but I didn't know it was her mother at first. So anyway, I'll post these things on Facebook, and people will say, write a book. Oh my God, all the people you've met, la, la, la. Yeah, what I have done, though, just this past year, I decided it was time to do a one-man show that was autobiographical. And I call it Have Fingers, Will Travel, My Unbelievable Songbook Journey. And in the course of a 75-minute show, I talk about all the different songwriters I met, and I also talk about meeting Jablonski, and play what I played for them when I met them, or when some of them I worked with, like a Hamlisch, and tell the stories. Now, I used to, in my concerts, I would maybe tell 1 or 2 stories, little anecdotes. But now I had to really pull it all together while the brain's still accurate, and really hone in on what these people said and the setup to meeting these people. And most of them were met through Ed Jablonski, because he wrote about them and they were friends. So anyway, I was the premiere for this Have Fingers Will Travel was last June at one of Michael Feinstein's club in Carmel, Indiana. And it was very well received. And then I did it again just a few weeks ago in Annapolis, Maryland, at a small venue for Live Arts Maryland, and it was very well received there. So I'm telling my manager, this is something I want to take all over the place. And I do include, and it was just on a friend's suggestion, because I hadn't when I first premiered it at Michael Feinstein's club. He said, how come you're not talking about that you had this brain tumor? Because it's just so weird that a brain tumor is what George Gershwin died from. And you had one that was basically moving to the base of your neck to kill you, and his was at the base of the neck. He said, why don't you're not mentioning that at all? And that's part of your story. So it made me pause and put it in there at the end. I didn't want to put it any place but the end, because I didn't want people thinking about it during the rest of the stories. So I do it just before I play the Gershwin medley I'm known for, that got me in all this trouble to begin with. And it seems to work there because I related to George, and it kind of is like a full circle moment for me and for the audience, that I was very lucky to have survived this, and I'm intact. And, you know, I share deafness with Beethoven, and away we go. So I'm very excited for this program, because for once, these stories that are all personal and nobody knows unless they've heard them from me, can get out there to people, because I think people are so surprised because of my age, because I'm not that old yet. But I was discovered by Jablonski at 15, and it was between the years of 15 and 30 that I met and played for all these people these people from the golden era of songwriting that were kind of in their twilight years, but still had all their faculties, and were just taken aback, first of all, by my Gershwin playing, but also if I played Irving Berlin for Irving Berlin, or Harold Arlen for Harold Arlen, or Sondheim for Sondheim, or whoever it was, how I could play it in a way that they like to hear their music played. I mean, one of the great quotes that was given to me, and there were witnesses, I played a reception for Stephen Sondheim. I want to say it was back in like around 1980, 81 at the Whitney Museum in New York. And my job is just to play Sondheim all night, because there was a small light opera company in Manhattan that did a performance of Little Night Music. And it was opening night. He saw it, and then they're coming for a reception at the Whitney, and I'm to play Sondheim. Now, playing Sondheim in front of Sondheim brings on a whole other layer of stuff, because he is so well. When you're playing it, his transitions, there could be one note difference in what would be a normal chord, and you're trying just to get all of that right and not simplify it. Okay, so the guy who was the head of the light opera company was taking him around, because Sondheim didn't like crowds, so he's up on a little balcony listening to the music, and I'm thinking, oh boy, I hope he likes it. After reception was done, the head of the opera company came up to me and says, well, Stephen really enjoyed your playing. In fact, he turned to me and said, it's great to hear my songs played with all the right chords. So that is the supreme compliment, because I'm sure he's heard, Sondheim had heard everybody play.
Everyone's version too. Everyone's interpretation.
It's just one of those things. I try to put myself in the songwriter or composer's shoes, and not to copy what they would play, but just think about how would they like to hear their music performed, And I'm really good at reading roadmaps, and sometimes the roadmap is very sketchy because it's like sheet music that anybody can play. But you kind of look beyond the notes a little bit, and if you do expand it or improvise on it, just in a way that you're not destroying the essence of what they wrote, or taking it to your own place. There's a time and place for that in jazz, absolutely. But I've never called myself a jazz artist. I have jazzy elements in what I do. It's like Gershwin. He's not really jazz per se. It's just that word was so big to cover territory that nobody knew what else to call it after ragtime and in the 20s and 30s. Oh, that's jazz. If you can't, it's not classical, it's jazz. So, but it's interesting how I'm kind of a funnel of all these different songwriters and experiences from that time that is, was not my time. It just feels right. I just have a sense of what that's all about.
Well, you have that connection from music, Kevin, and that's a great place to break for today. We look
Yeah.
forward to your performances and hopefully more progress on this book, which because you've already taken us on many stories in our already trips. So imagine all the ones that you've not revealed, will be fascinating. So I thank you for joining me today again, and look forward to us reconvening in the near future. Let's make it a shorter period of time this time.
Okay, we will indeed. Thanks so much, Jay.